And here we are live, everyone, in the spoiler room. Yes, it's a new month. And with this new month, we are Wasteland Wandering, in which case we are looking at 5 films because there's 5 Mondays. There's 5 Mondays, even though the last day of the month is it's in March, so I had to come up with one more. But we are Wasteland Wandering. And what is Wasteland Wandering? We're looking at films that involve people wandering the wasteland that aren't named Mad Max. So because we've already done a Mad Max month, we aren't revisiting, but we are looking at, yes, folks, I know you're going to be surprised, but there are other apocalypse films besides the Mad Max movies. I mean, if you grew up in the 80s, trust me, there's plenty of nuclear Holocaust apocalyptic films.
And most of them from Italy.
Huh?
Most of them from Italy.
Most of them from Italy, where they had certain sandal scripts that they decided to change to post-apocalyptic films, which we're not getting to that one. Steel Dawn is later this month. So anyway, tonight is actually one from the late 80s, 1998 it is, and we are looking at Six String Samurai, and I've got a wonderful panel here tonight to talk this interesting indie film that was a buzz for a while when it came out. First off, he is back with us, the man, myth, legend himself, Mr. Joe Randazzo is here. Hello, Joe.
Hey, everyone.
And look, he came back a second. It's 2 weeks in a row, no less. It is none other than filmmaker extraordinaire himself, Mr. Michael Myers. Hello, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself, Mark?
Doing well. This man has forgotten more about your home audio systems than I will ever be able to know. Mad props to you on that, sir, for sure. And none other than my man who's always coming back for more. We're always happy to have him here. It is my right-hand man, Mr. Ian Simmons. How you doing, Ian?
I'm doing great. I challenge that, though. I think it's more like I just won't leave. That's
you just won't leave. Actually, you're waiting for me to leave. He's like, why are you here? Get out of here. What the hell?
Yeah, Ian never leaves the StreamYard. He constantly has a camera going at all times.
He's got the camera
right off the camera. It's always just live streaming. It's just no one could see it.
And
Look,
he has
no secrets here on the live stream.
No, and he has the most viewers on Shower Night. Thank you for venturing down the stairs, pulling up the chair, and popping your favorite drink is. We discuss movie spoilers, and yes, tonight it is Six String Samurai, old school rock and roll versus metal on the apocalyptic wasteland, with a child who gives the kid in Babadook a run for his money. And so we are going to get a synopsis. And Mr. Michael Myers, I know you do enjoy this film quite a bit. So tonight, why don't you give us the synopsis of Six String Samurai?
All right. So the best thing about a movie like this is there's not a lot, and that's perfectly fine. True. So, post-apocalyptic world, specifically in the Nevada area, you have a samurai who is also a rock and roll musician who is making his way to Vegas after Elvis Presley has died to be the new king of rock and roll. And along the way, he meets a bunch of weird characters, everything from cannibalistic families to Russian Elvis impersonators to an actual full-on Russian army. There's a lot of Russian content in this movie. And, you know, a little bit of everything else. It is a wild ride.
It is definitely an interesting ride. Joe, we'll start with you. Do you remember when you first saw this? Was this just the first time?
This was my first time seeing it. I'd never seen it before. So the immediate thing I thought of was, bro, what if we make Lone Wolf and Cub, but we make it like Desperado, but we make it like Wizard of Oz?
They just keep building on it. They have like
more movies that they've seen and just piling it on. Dude, then they run into like a family that's like From the Hills Have Eyes.
Yeah, they've got their idea board at 3 a.m. with the munchies, and they're like, no, wait, I got it. Yeah, I can see that. Did you enjoy it? Did you
I enjoyed it in that, like, what the fuck is going on way.
Yeah.
You know,
Fair enough.
It kept me watching because I'm like, I mean, it does get repetitive because it eventually becomes, he goes a little while, he tries to pawn the kid off with somebody, he ends up in a fight. And the kid starts screaming. And he has to go rescue the kid. He has to take him, and so there's that aspect of it, which I was like, okay, it's just kind of repeating the same thing. But you just kind of I just kind of felt intrigued by what is it that they're going to do next.
Just who are they going to run into next? Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. At one point, it turns into like almost like a Hell Comes to Frogtown thing, and we'll be watching that later on this month. So
yes,
like
we will.
This guy was paying a lot of tribute to a lot of movies he loved.
There's definitely a touch on a lot of other apocalyptic films from the 80s. Some of them we will be covering this month. Absolutely. And Ian, I know I could gauge already kind of what how you felt about this film. This was your first time watch, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. I have a question for the panel. You said this movie pays tribute to some other movies we're going to be talking about. Is it too late to put in a bunch of planned absences for March? I don't know if I can do this for
remove your votes,
guys.
Go ahead, remove your votes.
My God. No, I really did not like anything about this movie. You know, I wrote about a film a few weeks ago called I Like Movies, which came out a couple years ago. And it's about a kid working a Canadian kid working in a video store in the mid 90s, right around the time of the Tarantino Rodriguez, kind of revolution. And I wrote about how those, them and a handful of other filmmakers influenced not only Hollywood but pop culture, so that you had this kind of these waves pouring out across the landscape for a decade, and the quality getting less and less and less. And so this would have been, not towards the end, but kind of right dab in the middle, where, it's got, you look at the poster for this thing, it's the poster for El Mariachi, except for a couple of like random people in the background. They actually have the opening rock number from Pulp Fiction in one of the fight scenes in this movie. This movie has no identity of its own, except for a lot of film school, like in your face, or a bunch of fisheye stuff. The fight choreography is abysmal, and you can't see it because everything's shot in close-ups, except for the occasional like wide shot where it just literally looks like people twirling around with swords and falling down. I mean, I guess it has its charms, but right off the bat, it's like it opens with this crawl. In 1957, Russia dropped the bomb, and then Elvis became king of America. I'm like, that's not how any of this works. It's not like Russia drops the bomb, and then we're like, oh, well, I guess we have a wasteland. No, then the world ends, right? Even in the late 50s, especially in the late 50s, when we're escalating, they would have dropped something. We would have dropped something throughout this movie, and this takes place 40 years after that. You got people running around in the uniforms they were wearing 40 years ago. That's not happening even outside the context of a nuclear wasteland. Clothes don't hold up that long and look that good. And so it's like that Patton Oswalt joke about people who didn't get The Road Warrior because they're like, wait, it's after nuclear war. There's no gasoline yet. People are driving around in cars. I don't get it. 0 stars. It's a great joke, but it can totally apply to a movie like this where I couldn't get into this world because none of it made any damn sense. And our lead character looks like Buddy Holly and the mariachi, and he sounds like fucking SpongeBob SquarePants. So yeah, hard pass for me on this guy.
He's a trained martial artist, so that's why they cast him. So that it wasn't for his voice.
He is a trained martial artist, absolutely.
But I agree with you.
Not a trained actor. I'm just going to put that out there.
He was a stuntman, I think. That was in a lot of martial arts films. But there is that aspect of it, because I remember finishing this movie and being like, this is the most film bro film I've ever fucking seen.
Well, we've got someone here who really enjoys the film, so that's why I wanted to first go to Ian.
I'm not, I don't
we've got Ian, we've got Joe, and now we've got Michael Myers, who is a big fan of this film. So, Mike, do you remember when you first saw this, and What do you love about this film?
I do. I probably saw it around when it came out. This was a staple on like Cinemax, or it was either Cinemax or HBO. One of the two. At least it was for me. It was on one of those premium channels. And so I also have to say, when this movie came out, I was like 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there, depending on when I saw it. I didn't see any of the other movies that they had been referencing. So I hadn't seen a Tarantino film yet. I hadn't seen a lot of kung fu or samurai films. I've seen a little bit of them. I hadn't seen Mad Max.
Sure.
So at the right age, this movie kind of rewired my brain a little bit, because it was also probably one of the earliest examples of me seeing a independent film like this that just it's a movie, but it looks different, it feels different, it's unlike anything I had seen before. And I almost felt like it was a fever dream at one point, because I had seen it so many times in a short period of time, and it left such an indelible mark. Because like I said, I hadn't seen all the other things it's referencing, so in that way it felt wholly unique. And then it was just impossible to see for the longest time.
Sure.
And I just, because you see things at a young enough age, and then it's kind of gone. You don't realize there's a fandom or that even exists. I kind of had the same thing before Monster Squad had its renaissance. I had memories of that, but no one knew what the fuck I was talking about. And this was also I didn't have the internet yet, so I couldn't just go and Google samurai movie with a rock and roll guy or whatever the fuck. So like, I'm just trying to remember what this movie is. And it just always kind of stuck with me. So that is definitely a part of it. Is I hadn't seen any of the other stuff that it's referencing. So for me, it just felt like, what is this? This is unlike anything I had seen before, because it was.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's a great point. I feel incredibly old right now, though.
You feel old.
I told you that story.
Were you born in 90?
Yeah.
Okay, no, because that makes sense.
The hairline doesn't show it, but I was.
You feel old. I'm the oldest one on the panel. Thank you very much.
But I have the worst hairline out of the panel. So
some genetics,
but no, I mean that totally. Yeah, it's weird, because I think we're both right. This is a terrible movie, and it's also the best movie if you saw it at 8, 9 years old and you don't know the context for everything else. Because when you were saying that, I honestly had this 2001 Stargate moment in my head. I'm like, oh my God, if that had been me watching this movie at 8 years old, yes, this would have been my favorite thing. Now, when you caught up to it years later, how's it hold up? I think that's a whole separate discussion.
I still really like it. I truly do. I don't care that it's a pastiche of other things, because that's just the fucking world of cinema. The world of filmmaking. Quentin Tarantino is everyone's favorite fucking filmmaker, and he steals shit from everyone, and no one seems to bat an eyelash really at it.
Well, so, there's a big difference, though. A big difference in the quality of the filmmaking that he does, and also the fact that a lot of what he steals from is genre stuff that he's making for the masses that a lot of people have not seen. And so when they hear about, like, wait, he stole this from what's City on Fire, let me go look that up and figure out what these influences are. He's not ripping off genre stuff to sell to a genre audience. He's ripping off genre stuff to sell to the mainstream, and he acknowledges it. So I think there's a difference there. When I watch Six String Samurai, I'm seeing someone who liked a lot of stuff that was very popular and wanted to put it into his own movie, but didn't quite have the talent to put a spin on it that makes sense, or execute it in a way that's compelling enough to gloss over the fact that all the material is stolen.
And I think it's also the opposite of Tarantino, in that Tarantino is taking from lesser known films and putting them into a mainstream film. This is a lesser known film taking things from bigger films. So I think I think that's part of it too. So when you've seen more movies, like you said, you've seen it at 8 years old. Yeah, at 8 years old, like Ian said, if I had seen this at 8, had I seen this when it came out at 17, 18, and I hadn't seen Lone Wolf and Cub, and I hadn't seen, a lot of the movies this is referencing, I probably would have thought all that stuff was amazing too. So yeah, I agree with Ian on that part. That being said, I found it entertaining. I mean, I thought it was batshit insane, but I found it entertaining.
So I guess here's my question then, since I feel like this episode is going to be me defending this movie the entire time. So what is the difference between this and say that all the ripoff films they used to make? Like what?
I mean, there were a ton of Mad Max ripoffs. Yeah.
Not even just Mad Max ripoffs, like, all the Bruce Lee clone films or all the Jaws ripoff films. Like, what fundamentally is the difference? Like, I know, Ian, you can say that he doesn't have the skill, and there's probably a lot of truth to that. He barely was out of film school when he started making this. He funded half of this film himself, and then got lucky enough that he found some investors who came in and helped finish it. But I also think there's more skill in this film than you're giving him credit for.
I don't see it, honestly.
After having just watched She-Devil on Wheels, filmmaking in this film feels like fucking Citizen Kane.
No, I disagree. I think, and it's funny because I was going to say in part of my intro that I made that joke about, is this what going to be watching for the next 5 weeks? I feel like we ended a really terrific month with a really terrible movie, and now I feel like we're starting off another month with a pretty bad movie, and I'm wondering if we're going to go in the opposite direction or if this is the peak of these Wasteland Wanderin films. I mean, the thing is, yeah, he got out of film school. I don't know anything about this Mungia guy. I don't know if he's done anything since. I'm not surprised he found investors because, back then people were throwing money out like, oh, I've got this Tarantino-esque thing and it's really batshit crazy. Cool. I'm going to jump on this with a few $1,000s in case it catches the zeitgeist and becomes the next, Universal will buy it from us and make it into a Desperado 2. So that's not a big lift. But the other thing, like, I'm watching it, there's nothing, I don't think, innovative about it. It feels like he had just enough skill to replicate things he'd seen in other movies, but not enough skill to make it interesting or fun to watch. Like the opening fight is all in this weird kind of distorted vision and close-ups that I couldn't honestly tell what the hell was going on. And I was glad that it wasn't the entire film. But also, we've mentioned that little boy. All he does, except for when he does decide to finally talk like a regular person, he just screams and cries. And I don't usually fast forward through movies, but there were a couple of passages where I'm like, okay, he's just doing this routine, like that whole bit where he won't stop crying. So Buddy decides to, pretend to fall and hurt himself, and the kid starts laughing. And they do this for like 2 minutes of screen time. And I'm sorry, 15 seconds, 15 seconds. Thank Christ it's done. Let's move on.
As far as my answer to how to, like, I don't see those ripoffs. Like, I don't watch The Last Shark or Hands of Steel or any of those movies thinking that I'm going to get like great cinema. Like I like trashy movies, so I don't, to me, watching a ripoff film, and man, there is something that Justin Martell and I have been talking about lately that's gonna, oh man, if that takes off, it's gonna be really funny that we were talking about this on this podcast. But I kind of enjoy ripoff films. I enjoy them for what they are. I kind of like to meet movies where they are, which is why, like, I was like, okay, I don't think this was anything innovative, but at the same time, I had a good time with it. And sometimes it's all I need. I don't always need everything to be, best picture worthy. As long as it's entertaining, and this was, to me, entertaining. It was entertaining in the what are they going to do next way. But
I can see both sides of it.
I'm kind of right in the middle with you.
We haven't gotten to me. I'll just let you guys go. I'm drinking Wisconsinably here as you folks have this wonderful discussion.
And I should also say too, like, no hard feelings. I know I'm the only one who seems to have a true fondness for this film. So I'm just playing devil's advocate, realistically.
Oh,
Well, no,
that's what we're here to do. We're talking movies. It's all good.
This is the whole point of this. But no, you also mentioned the perspective of there are those impressionable ages. We've all got that to that certain film we saw at around 8, 9, 10 years old that you watch, and it's probably why I adore Maximum Overdrive. It is probably why I adore so much Maximum Overdrive, recognizing the criticism people have for that film. I first saw that film.
I just watched the Jerky Boys movie the other night. Like, that is an objectively terrible movie, but I loved it. I was watching it and laughing and having a good time with it. And I think it's because, I was, what year did that movie come out? 95? I was 14. Yeah. So I was exactly the age group that movie's targeting at exactly the time it comes out. And it happens,
And watching Six String Samurai again, my experience with it was I had a buddy, a coworker, friend, and he's cousin of my best friend, my brother from another mother. Anyway, he told me, he goes, "Have you seen Six String Samurai?" And I'm like, "What is that?" Because back in the day, folks, like, hard to believe, indie films never usually left the festival. Okay, so they kind of get tossed on video, direct to video eventually, maybe, but even especially in the 90s, when you had that weird thing where the rental stores were still big but maybe not quite, and DVD but VHS, but we got this internet thing. But he told me about Six String Samurai, and I'm like, "What is that?" And he described it to me. I'm like, "I'll watch it." And I watched it, and I remember enjoying it quite a bit. For me, the film, it's not so much the story. I could do without the kid. I really wish they would have handled the kid differently. I loved the world that this was in. The fact that they have taken music and rock and roll being like the main, foundation for what's left of society of sorts, to where you have this metal group who is led by Death, the guy who calls himself Death. He's got a top hat. Of course, they're paying homage to a nod to Slash, of course, being in the top hat. And Death is walking around, and he's supposed to be more metal. And we have our guy who looks like Buddy Holly, who apparently is actually kind of supposed to be like a Buddy Holly, actually Buddy Holly in a way, which.
Well, his name is Buddy, so
his name is Buddy, or a descendant of. I'm not quite sure, but in any case, I liked the world that I think this takes place in, more so than the story itself. I liked this kind of amalgamation of apocalypse and music and rock and roll, because I love music. So I loved I thought there was creativity in the actual story, and watching it this time, I still enjoyed myself, but there were some elements that I'm like, now that I'm so much older now, but I've watched so many more indie films, I realized this was, like I said, back when indie was through bootleg CDs and downloads, because that was the only way you could see some of these movies, because they were only in festival circuit.
And they pop up on IFC or something like that, or the Sundance Channel, and that's
but in '98, it's still, they weren't really. There were very few, and I liked the gimmick of this. I like the main character. Watching it again, the story, I did notice, is a bit more repetitive than I remember it. And in all honesty, I must have just blocked out the kid. But there's a lot of elements that I really like, but I can see both sides, both Mike and Ian's side, and I'm not just trying to be on the fence guy there. I can see that angle for both. I didn't remember the heavy Oz influence.
I didn't remember that either, and for some reason in my mind, I thought the kid was completely silent.
Yeah, but I didn't remember. And what's funny is watching it here and watching them talk about Oz. It's like, Wow, I did not remember, and I'd have to look back. I did review it a number of years ago. Maybe I'm full of shit. I don't know. I don't remember what I did yesterday, so I apologize to folks but I didn't remember the such a heavy Oz influence down to your villain. Yes, this is a spoiler room, folks. Your villain being killed by water. I'm like, the villain is literally taken out like the Wicked Witch of the West, and I'm like, they mentioned Yellow Brick Road. You get a little person in here at one point that he runs across.
Who also makes a Wizard of Oz reference in his dialogue, and I cannot remember it now.
Yeah, he says
Yellow Brick Road.
Yeah, he just says, take the Yellow Brick Road.
Was that the one? Yeah. I thought he said something else that referenced.
He might have, but then also at the very end, and it didn't click on me, I don't think, the first time I watched it. I'm like, they literally designed Vegas to look like the Emerald City.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
Oz reference.
So, and I was reading up some trivia on it. Apparently, this was intended to be part of a trilogy.
Yeah.
That,
I know they made some comic books, which that makes complete sense. This feels like complete 90s comic book fodder.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this definitely
about this movie feels 90s.
Everything.
Everything about this movie. This is the most indie-rific late 90s movie.
And it blew young Michael's fucking mind.
I'll be honest, I probably would have been in the same boat as you if I had seen this in 1998. Whatever it was, 1998.
Yeah.
17-year-old me seeing this would have been like, holy shit, this is the most amazing movie I've ever seen. But now, almost 30 years later and 10,000 movies later, I'm like, I've seen this. I've seen that too. This is another movie they're putting in there.
But I mean, for me, I guess it's the creativity. I always like amalgamations and variations of stuff. And I think that's what the appeal is for me. Watching it again, though, the story didn't hit me quite as well. Ian, you're right in the repetition. And it's unfortunate some of the action scenes are shot closer up because Jeffrey Falcone, who plays Buddy, is a martial arts expert. He didn't use any wires or anything. There are some.
He was actually before he did this was doing films in China.
Yeah.
They usually cast him as the villain because he was a white guy. He could do kung fu, so they're like, "Fuck."
Well, there you go. I mean, that instantly, but he's got work. Then he's got steady work.
Yeah, and apparently, he kind of disappeared off the planet. No one knows what happened to him.
This was his last movie.
Yeah, there's an interesting documentary on if anyone has the Vinegar Syndrome release. There is a interesting documentary about it, and it's. Yeah, he just kind of disappeared off the planet. No one knows what happened to him.
It's maybe he knew how Ian was going to feel about the film 30 years later and just decided to. Yeah, I don't want to hear that. No, just kidding, Ian. I'm just kidding.
I would have given it to him when this came out because I was a big Tarantino head, so I recognize this off the bat. No, I mean the question about other ripoff movies. I haven't watched a lot of those. I think possibly because there's so many other movies that I haven't watched that I probably should have seen by now. That it was like, yeah, this is it's like Jaws, but it's not nearly as good. I'm like, you're not selling me on it. There's a certain charm, but when you capture the zeitgeist, it's the same argument against The Asylum. It's just a popular trend. We're going to make a bunch of cheap knockoff movies with the hope that we're going to get enough scratch to make other cheap knockoff movies. I respect the game. I respect people who want to do that. We talked about that with Herschel Gordon Lewis last week. Mm-hmm. But as far as me spending my time watching it, I will if you want me to, but I'm also not going to be wrapped up in the charm. Be like, no, this was horseshit and it's wasting my time. Now, what this conversation has put me in mind of is even more the wasted potential of this film, because I just looked up. You're talking about Buddy, and Buddy Holly died in 1959 in that plane crash. So it's entirely possible this, because he looks like Buddy Holly. They call him Buddy. So maybe this is supposed to be him, but I'm thinking, would it be really cool to have a film like, maybe in the early 50s, you've got somehow Elvis, Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper get together and they're doing a tour of a bomb shelter, like a celebrity bomb shelter, and then the war happens and they come up years later in this nuclear wasteland. They got to fight their way across America with the power of rock and roll. I would watch
one
that
of them
movie.
a katana, and I'm fucking in.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. Like one of my biggest problems with this movie is I never shook the feeling that they were just fucking around. Like everything's a gag, everything's like a crazy zoomy fisheye lens on things or badly filmed fight scenes. I'm like, what if they actually reached in and made a story out of this that wasn't just a collection of references? Yeah, there's Wizard of Oz all over this place. I'm surprised they didn't throw in like 5 Alice in Wonderland references, because that's the fantasy, fable allegory that everybody goes to. It doesn't have an imagination. I would love to have seen a serious take on this movie, and it reminded me of a movie that does this 1,000 times better and also has real drama, and you care about the characters and what happens to them, and what happens to them is not necessarily predictable, and that's Turbo Kid, a movie that I avoided for years because like, oh, it's so 80s back in the craze, and like, we're gonna make everything look like Stranger Things. And then I finally watched it at a friend's house for his birthday party, and I was completely enraptured. Everybody else in the party like faded away, and I was just watching this movie completely transfixed. There should be a remake of Six String Samurai. I'm sure if someone announced it, Falcon would show up and be in the movie again. That would be half the story right there. But I would watch the hell out of that.
Old man.
There you go.
Old man Buddy.
Just call it Falcon. It's kind of like, no, because that'd be like Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But
No.
Falcon and the Nuclear Winter Soldier. There you go.
Why not? Why not?
Benian's idea also had me thinking of Bubba Hotep, because you have the old Elvis and the old JFK.
Yes.
I love Bubba Hotep. That was a trivia movie here back when they were still doing indie films, and that was one of the ones that was really good. One of the ones that wasn't such a big hit was the film Georgia, which to this day has scarred me. And there was another film, Ice Storm, which some people think is wonderful, and mad props to them for thinking Ice Storm is wonderful, because
the Ang Lee film.
I think so, with
Elijah Wood and Christina Ricci.
Yeah, the one that has the swinger party at some point. And yeah, anyway, but Bubba Hotep was like that. But yeah, Turbo Kid, Apple, one of the best characters ever to hit cinema ever. Apple is like, I have yet to find a character who is just so like, you immediately connect and you just want to protect Apple with everything possible, because Apple is like the most wonderful person. It's wonderful. But I get Turbo Kid. Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing this maybe getting a reboot and getting a retailer, because I think there's a lot of great ideas and concepts here in Six String Samurai. I like I said, I liked the idea of the music being a major part of this culture in general. I mean, people have guitars left and right. They're players, that's part of your judgment, is how well you play or what kind of guitar you have. What's interesting with this is it makes me feel like there was possibly more story that was cut out, because you don't really find out till the end that death is a representation of heavy metal. And I mean, yeah, you got kind of the look compared to the way Buddy looks, which is 50s rock and roll, but still there's not really a mention or anything of it until like the end. And then I'm like, oh, okay, that's what that's about.
And I'll definitely give you that, because what's interesting too is, once again, when I saw this movie as a kid, I thought there was more plot to it than I thought, and I think it's because I, being an impressionable child, built upon the world and essentially added the story where it didn't exist, and essentially created the version of this story that I wanted to see. Because like, like I said, for some reason, this movie just really stuck with me, and I thought this was a legitimately big movie. So, like, anytime I saw a samurai sword as a kid, I was like, it'd be cool if he had a guitar as well. Like, Buddy was kind of like a superhero to me.
No, and that's awesome, and that's awesome. I mean,
that's the thing. There really isn't like a lot of plot at all to this movie.
No,
it's like Joe Bob Briggs says, there's not a lot of plot to get in the way of the movie.
No, there's very little. It's just kind of he needs to get to Las Vegas, and shit happens along the way.
It's action beat after action beat after action beat, which I could see why as a kid I would totally
up until the TV show. This is the closest thing he ever got to a Fallout movie. Because, like, it's a simple A to B plot. I have to go find my dad, and then a bunch of shit happens in the way.
And actually, wasn't one of the towns they were in called Fallout?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah.
And the people who played Fallout are clearly fans of this because there's an achievement in New Vegas called the 6-string samurai.
Mm-hmm.
If you score X amount of points with melee weapons, they give you an achievement that's the little pit boy that looks like Buddy.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. This made the impression on a number of people. Like I said, my friend loved it. He's like, "Oh, you gotta see this," and I enjoyed it quite a bit, more so the world than the story. I'd love to see another story in this world, a little bit more structured, maybe, a little bit more to it than just getting to point A and B.
I guess I'd be interested to see. So Lance Mangia, who made it, he didn't have a big career. Like, he did one of the Crow sequels.
Yeah.
One of the direct-to-video ones, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Like, okay, you made this film, you show you can do something with not a lot of money. Here, go make a Crow movie. I just feel like that's what happens. At least that's what happened. But now he makes documentaries. And I don't know, I feel like it'd be interesting to see, like, what can you do now with it? Maybe who knows? It could obviously it could very easily be terrible, like when they did a sequel to SLC Punk. That was incredibly hard to watch, but could also, maybe get some magic. I don't know. Like, I'm one of the few people that legitimately wants to see it, because I think I was probably the most excited person on the planet when Vinegar Syndrome released this, because all I had was a bootleg DVD that my English teacher in high school made for me.
Right, because that's the only way you could see the indie films back then.
That's a cool teacher.
Yeah,
that is a cool teacher.
I told him, because I once again, not knowing if this movie really existed, and around high school was when the internet was far more accessible. I wrote a story that was clearly just me ripping this off for English class. And he goes, this is a funny idea. Where'd you get it from? He's like, "Oh, I stole it from a movie called 6-String Samurai." And he goes, "What the fuck is 6-String Samurai?" So I tried to explain it to him, and then the next day he goes, "Oh, I found that movie for you and the soundtrack." So he put both of them for me.
That really is a great teacher, though.
Mr. Whiskey, if you're out there, you're fucking cool, man.
That's a cool teacher. And again, back then, some of those indie films, that was the only way you. In fact, that's for like trivia here, where we play in the world's largest trivia contest. One of the reasons they kind of broke away from showing the trivia movie as being some rare independent festival gem of sorts was because when the internet started to grow, there were people going out to the internet to find illegal copies of the film, because it was just so they could take notes on it, because in case you missed them in the theater. But he didn't want to encourage that behavior, so he chose more classics on the big screen, which actually worked out better, because I got to see things like Dr. Strangelove on the big screen and Singing in the Rain on the big screen, and Casablanca on the big screen, like the mega screen. And I'm just like, this is, and we all loved it because anyone who plays trivia already has copies of those films at home. So we could just sit and watch the film and enjoy the movie more so than, oh shit, what was the license plate number on that? So, but what in the 98 or whatever, indie films were still being discovered underground. Why? I mean, that's where true, like, kind of underground, not underground theaters, but underground as in, hey, have you heard about this film? That type of or you'd be on Yes, this is how old I am, folks. On alt news groups, finding about movies that people would post on, because there was a thing, and they still exist kind of today, although they're full of just spam. Yes, alt binaries news groups. I'm probably the only one who knows what those are, but alt binary soundtracks. Yeah, let's just say, yeah, it was.
I don't know what any of that means.
I know what all those words mean separately, but not.
Okay, you know what message boards are?
Yes.
You guys don't recognize what message boards are.
Yeah.
Alt binaries
like
news.
You put the pin in it with a piece of paper if you're like trying to find a bandmate or something.
Alt binaries news groups. Alt binaries news groups were text based. You could usually, your ISP, if they replicated them from servers, and basically they were kind of like message or news groups. They were before you had Reddit type of groups. You had alt binaries groups, which were all text based. They were just basic text, like message threads out there. And occasionally you would get the creative person who could take a file, break it down to the hex code, and then they would post certain batches of hex code with a number, and then you could get a piece of software that would go through the alt binaries message board, find all of the related files, compile it, and create the file. Alt binaries news groups back then was probably one of the earliest forms that people were using for piracy back in the day. But anyway, but also though, they were parts where you could go to where you would find out about people messaging about films, and that you'd have discussions and such. And that's where people would say, oh, hey, have you heard this film? And in this case, it was my coworker who said, hey, have you heard Six String Samurai? I'm like, I haven't heard Six String Samurai. He described it to me, and that's how I got it. And so sorry for the ramble, but I was just saying that's where, back then it was a different scene for indie films. I mean, we're talking 30 years ago, practically, 25 years ago. And it was different back then on how you discover things. Now, I mean, you literally go to Tubi and there you go. I mean,
not necessarily, because you still have a lot of movies that still need to be dug up somehow.
Well, yeah,
it's strange that there's so many movies that, like just they're out there. Like on streaming, there's still such a limit, man.
There is.
There's so much stuff that. What did we do? It was on Literary License. We did. God, I don't remember the movie, but we couldn't find it streaming anywhere. So we were like, do we put off the podcast for a couple of days? Because we all got to buy it on Amazon. None of us had it. Yeah, guys, you're going to put this off.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was when I saw that, I didn't get it, but when I saw Vinegar Syndrome was doing the treatment for Six String Samurai, I'm like, oh, that's good on it. That's good for Six String, because it is a creative film. Maybe not the best told story for some, but it's still.
Christmas came early, man, when that was announced.
Oh, I bet. But a lot of for me, it was a lot of interesting ideas at the end of the day. I loved the look of the main character. I must have blocked out the kid. I love the idea of the guy walking around with both a guitar and a katana, and the fact that he walked around with that umbrella that was beat to shit. Because I looked at that umbrella and I go, there's a story there. Why he still has that umbrella.
And it's the cliche of every screenwriting book in the 90s. You take something and you beat it up, and therefore it has a story. That pair of pants has a story. The gold in the suitcase of Pulp Fiction, which never didn't come out forever of what was actually in the suitcase, but many people speculated for many years of what was actually in the suitcase, and all it was a light that came out. But I mean, there was a history there of some sort that you wanted to know more of. I wanted to know more about the
the umbrella or where his guitar actually came from. You know, I mean, there was a lot of things about this character that had my brain going, and maybe I was like 8-year-old. I am like an 8-year-old. So I was probably piecing stuff together too, of making, you know, building on what was being presented here in the elements, you know.
Yeah.
But for the type of film it is, they actually do a lot. I mean, where they film it in that, there's quite a cast. There's for the production that they make, I'm impressed by the amount of stuff that they make for this. I mean, the vehicles, you know, some of the vehicles in that are dressed up. People are in costumes and makeup. You have each area giving its own identity. So, you know, there was some money put behind this, and that I respect as well. That
2 million was what I read, and apparently it made back 142,000. So
yeah, and
that's why we never got that trilogy.
Oh, it was made for 2 million.
Yeah, and then I think that was what they brought in for finishing funds. From what they said in the documentary, the director was able to cobble together like 25 grand with his student loans, pretty much just
used his student loans for
yes. And then Jeffrey Falcon also got like 25 together, and they're like, okay, we can do something with this. And at the time, the director was going around. I think the short film he made prior to this had made it to Sundance, so they shot some of this movie beforehand. We're going to try to use that to try to sell it, and they barely had enough money. They were actually shooting in Death Valley, which they said they kept losing crew members because it's such a fucking terrible place to shoot. And they couldn't shoot with sound for the first quarter of the movie because they couldn't afford it. So they just dubbed it all later on, like, you know, like Italian films did. And they had just enough where someone's like, okay, I can see what you're going for with this. And apparently, too, there was a rep at Panavision that was like, okay, this is a goofy idea. I'm just going to give you guys a professional camera and lens package for free.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's like they cut a lot of deals. It's kind of like when you find out about, you know, everyone talks about how El Mariachi was made for $5 grand, but they don't talk about how much money Miramax pumped into it afterwards to finish it, advertise it. Yeah. The core movie was made for $5 grand. If they actually would have had to pay for their cameras and all this other stuff, or even paid their crew more than some meals and gas, this movie probably would have cost a lot more. But they're able to stretch the very small budget they had because they got some really kick-ass favors. And I know Ian, me and you aren't necessarily going to agree on the look of the film or even some of the filmmaking prowess, but I think for how little money they had, especially before someone came in with $2 million to help them finish it, I'm actually still impressed by how much they accomplished with so little.
I mean, look, they made a movie, right? But honestly, that's
a feat.
It is a feat, but it's also the baseline, right? You could take the shittiest movie that any of us could think of and just say, well, they made a movie that counts for 1% of me giving a shit. It has to actually be something worth investing my time in, and that's, you know, this is not this. And, you know, honestly, $2 million plus whatever they you know kicked in to get the seed money or whatever, and to make 140, you're talking $2 million in 1997, $98. That's a big investment.
Yeah.
So I can understand why, you know, I think I wonder if Lance Mungia offered this Falcon guy up as collateral.
Maybe that's it. That's why we don't know who it is.
That's why we don't know where Falcon
It was his idea.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just, you know.
No, but the thing is, like, hearing you describe the making of this movie, I would much rather watch that documentary about the making of it, because it reminds me of Lost in La Mancha, the story about Terry Gilliam trying to make Don Quixote for 20 years or whatever it was. That documentary ironically goes on too long and ended up not being as interesting as the movie itself. and vice versa, because I saw the movie when they finally released it a few years ago, because they finished it, and I'm like, I can kind of see where this is shelved. But yeah, and also the mariachi story, the making of El Mariachi. If you read Rebel Without a Crew by Robert Rodriguez, it's a great book.
Oh, that's a
But
fantastic book.
But it's also in service of a legitimately great movie.
Mhm.
Now, the Desperado, the Universal remake, that's got its own charms, and I kind of like both movies, a lot for different reasons. But Six String Samurai, the only thing I can say out of it is it's a great sketch. I'd love to see the finished work.
And honestly, I do agree with you. Like, I would have loved to have seen what he actually saw in his head. I feel like he got, like you said, you said it beautifully. There was an interesting sketch that he just never really got a chance to finish or wasn't able, and what have you. And some of it probably is skill. He probably, the reason I don't storyboard is because I can't get what's in my head on a fucking piece of paper.
Mhm.
And in my mind, there's no point in doing a storyboard if it doesn't actually depict what I'm trying to show my cast and crew. And some of that could have been that too. It's like he had images probably in his head, strong thoughts of what he wanted to do, and sometimes you just don't have the skill to get yourself there, or sometimes not even skill things. You just don't have the means.
You don't have the
And that's the thing. It's like I have some modicum of sympathy now that we've had this conversation, because I didn't know that the filmmaker is just out of film school and all the struggles to get this stuff made. So in my mind, it's just a guy making a movie, right? Now, knowing the backstory, I am sympathetic to it, but it's also, does that change my experience of watching the movie? Had I known this going in, I hate caveat movies. Well, we didn't quite have the budget for this. Well, we ran out of time. Well, if the movie is great, then that's interesting. Like, wow, you made this with all those limitations, versus, yeah, I can kind of see you ran into some problems there.
Well,
that's just me.
It's one of those. I was impressed when I saw the credits at the end. For this being made in '98, being an indie film, that it was shot on film. That
I would not be shocked by that, because it really wasn't, because video in '98 looked awful.
Well, yeah, it did.
Unless you're doing like a Dogma 95 type of thing. Well, funny enough, going back to him being in school, they say in the documentary, one of the line items that the studio that picked this up paid for was his final semester in college, because he still needed a location at that school, and they'd only let him do it if he was a student. So they paid for his final semester, which is this just an extremely funny story.
Awesome.
I was looking at the end credits too, and I noticed a name in there, and I actually had to stop and Google it to make sure. I'm like, that can't be her, and it was. Leanna Creel is listed as one of the producers on this movie.
Yeah,
and she was on was Saved by the Bell
Mhm.
in the later seasons. Yeah,
she went on to do quite a bit of producing as well.
A couple other like cults movies in the late '90s.
Yeah, so she was a producer on But I'm a Cheerleader.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And then we can't talk I really love the music by the Red Elvises, but then the fact that this is Brian Tyler, who's now Marvel movies. This is one of his first movies to compose this.
Yeah, it surprised me when that name popped up, because I forgot till I'm like, wait, did I see that? I actually rewound it for a minute. I go, it said Brian Tyler. Holy shit.
You mean the guy that composed the music for Simon Says?
Yeah, that's the exact movie that came to my head.
And actually, ironically, Bubba Hotep as well composed.
He did, yes. He composed the music.
Here's everything I learned from Six String Samurai. Let's do it again, but a little different, a little more somber, a little more sad.
This, I'm with you. This one, I would love to see the director revisit this and try to make this again with what he probably knows now versus what he knows then, and getting some backing, and especially with, I
don't think he'd have the energy now.
You don't think so, though?
Because I think what makes this, what made it work for me, I think, is the indie energy of it. And now I feel like he'd be too established if he's making like
documentaries. Yeah, he's actually got a crowdfunding out right now for a documentary. Actually, that he's
I
definitely agree with Joe. Like this movie, even before you said that indie energy you're talking about, Joe. Knowing what I know now about the making of, that was a young film student who didn't know better and thought I could go out to Death Valley and shoot a fucking movie. And now, like,
he'd be like, I can't go out to Death Valley and shoot a fucking movie.
Dude, my first short, which we shot in February and March of 2001, we were going to JFK Airport and pulling up and shooting our stuff. And like 9 months later, that's not happening. 9 months later, the cops are coming after us. So there's a lot of things that were going on that you could do in the 90s in this movie. We would never be able to do it now.
Yeah.
Oof. Yeah, but I guess for me though, I'd like to see this world, because again, there's a lot of great ideas here, and I wonder if the scope of what they wanted to do was beyond their means, but they still were trying. Because you can see the attempts here, and I'm just like
I think granted, he's not on this level. Like the best way to do it would be have him produce it and find some young filmmaker who still has that energy to go out to fucking Death Valley. But like I was even just thinking, it's like this film nor the people nor the franchise, quote unquote franchise. They had comic books. I feel like I can kind of call it a franchise. This property, that's probably a better term, isn't popular enough. But like you even get say the guys who did Ready or Not or those new Scream movies, give them a property like this and let them just go wild.
I feel like even they're too established for this. Like I feel like grown up with a career can't make this movie. Yeah, this is somebody's first movie. This cannot be anything else.
Someone with a vision and a voice, this property, and be like, go fucking make something weird.
Well, but I'm coming from a different place, because this is what I want to see. I want to see an adult version. I want to see someone who is established, who doesn't have that gonzo energy, or is at least able to channel that into something that takes itself seriously. I don't want to see a young, non-established filmmaker redo this film. I want to see a different version of this story that actually has some substance.
That's definitely fair.
Take the guy who did Turbo Kid. Give the guy who did Turbo Kid this movie.
We know he can shoot in the desert.
He had done a number of films before he did Turbo Kid, so I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing him. He could handle the property. Or the folks who made Psycho Gorman. give them a property like this. Give them here. You guys go play with this, because those guys just made films. Those are two films that just felt like they went ahead and just made this, they wanted to tell this story. And I mean,
they have another one coming out, don't they? Coming out soon.
Frankie Frico, was it?
Oh, was that them? Okay. So I did see Frankie Frico.
Yeah.
What I felt about that was it felt like an attempt to make like a Ghoulies or a Gremlins, but there was something about it that just felt like it was missing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it was. I think it was the manic energy of Gremlins. I think that's what was missing.
That could be the case. Yeah, I don't think I've seen that yet. But I mean, the director of Turbo Kid went on to do Summer of '84. So they could possibly pull it off. And I think we'll wrap it up here. This is an interesting window into late 90s indie films.
Young Michael's childhood obsession.
and a young Michael's childhood
set a stone for everything I'm interested in.
A young Michael's, and that's why I love this panel, differing ages and opinions, because we all come from a slightly different place with this. But it's just interesting. That's why this film this month, if you do want to excuse yourself, Ian, from this
I was
month,
kidding.
you're more than welcome to. But I think
the one movie out of the 5 I've seen, it's a cult classic, but it's not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination.
Which one?
Hell Comes to Frogtown.
Oh yes, well,
and the sequels only get worse if we ever.
I didn't like that one too. So what the fuck do I know?
I like it, but I like it.
We know my tastes in films, and I've been told many times in the last 48 hours of how wrong my tastes in films are. So that's okay. But I don't care, because I've picked this whole month are films that I watched as a kid quite a bit. Not so much Steel Dawn, but the other ones, folks. Yes, I hope you stick around for Wasteland Wandering, because there'll be spirited conversations like this, and I'm sure people will have varied opinions about the films that I picked. But yes, we do have, next week will be a film that turns 50, like myself this year, A Boy and His Dog, starring a very young Don Johnson, a film that I watched later and I just adored. And then after that, we've got Steel Dawn, which is a Patrick Swayze vehicle in the post-apocalyptic wasteland.
Crazy
After that, we've got Roddy Piper in Hell Comes to Frogtown, which at least the title tells you exactly what you're going into.
I love titles that tell you exactly what
you know exactly. Hell Comes to Frogtown. Guess what? Roddy Piper's character, a little spoiler, name is Hell.
Sam
Hell.
Sam.
He is so. Can I just say, we're not talking about Hell Comes to Frogtown. The title is Hell Comes to Frogtown. So in my mind, the first time I watched it, I was not expecting a literal Frogtown. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah. So,
or the amount of.
Yeah, so we'll get to that. Yeah. We'll get to that in a few weeks, and then we end the month with Damnation Alley, a film that is near and dear to my young childhood heart, because that as well is a George Peppard and J. Michael Vincent when he was a hot item for a minute. So we got a lot of interesting films with bigger names that you may not have realized that they were in. So if nothing else, that should appeal to you folks. So hope you come back. And now, as always, I give my wonderful, patient, far more knowledgeable than I am panel the license to shill. So first off, Michael Vyers, we're going to start with you, sir. Please shill away.
All right. So you guys can hear me talk more about Six String Samurai or whatever the fuck else I feel like talking about on my podcast, The Shameless Picture Show. Our episode on Waiting for Guffman just dropped, and then I have another episode with the new creative director at Milwaukee Film, Susan Kearns. We're talking about Bloodbeat, because we wanted to talk about Wisconsin-based film. And then, speaking of Milwaukee Film, I can't go into extreme details yet, but there is going to be some really interesting partnerships with Milwaukee Film and the Shameless Picture Show coming up. And then, so we don't have a date yet, but I'm just too excited not to mention it. I have landed a guest I am extremely excited for this season. I will be talking to the daughter of Vincent Price, Victoria Price.
Oh, great.
Wow. Nice. Well, excellent. So definitely check out the Shameless Picture Show. Make sure you like, subscribe, bells and whistles and all that. Joe, what you got, sir? License to shill is yours.
I worked for The Last Drive-In, and the season premiere is coming up this Friday night. It's going to be a double feature. Can't say what the movies are, but one of them, Joe Bob has hinted, will be the centennial of a very famous horror film. So think of the first horror film you might think of from 1925. That's the one.
There were so many. Now, if he would have picked an adult film from 1925, that'd be harder to pick from. But anyway.
They existed.
Oh God, yeah,
they existed.
Oh, yeah. Right after they figured out, okay, the train entered the station. How can we do that?
Oh, dude, I watched one of I have the Severin Emmanuel box set, and I watched one of the movies on it a couple weeks ago, and it literally, they're laying in bed, train entering a tunnel. I'm like, oh my God, machine something. Holy shit, they're actually doing this.
I would be so impressed by that.
But yeah, that's the that's my show for this week. Check out The Last Drive-In on Shudder this coming Friday night. It's going to be 2 films, similar theme. The second one is Joe Bob did put it out. It's a European horror film. Oh. And it's one of my favorites from one of the best directors. So one of the most famous horror directors from a European country. Fuck, I hate that he doesn't give a little bit more.
We're gonna have to give you a new moniker as well, sir, Professor.
I'm gonna have to be a fucking cryptic Joe now because I can't tell you what the movie's gonna be.
No, you can't. But will you be teaching us soon? Do you have anything?
Well, we'll see about that. I got to talk to those guys on Wednesday morning. So
okay. So
until I have something solid,
we may have to give you another moniker. And Ian, as always, the license to shill is now yours, sir.
I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com, and also Kicking the Seat here on YouTube. What's going on? Wednesday, I'm going to do kind of an Oscar hangover show talking about Amadeus from 1984, back from a time when they made real movies and nominated them for Best Picture. So I'm excited to talk about that. A movie I'd not seen until I watched it over the weekend, and wow.
Is that Wednesday or Tuesday?
Wednesday.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so that's what I got. Oh, and also here on Monday nights. And I'm not going to abandon you, Mark. I'm going to be here for all.
If you did, I wouldn't blame you. You know,
I would blame myself. I wouldn't be able to sleep. I don't sleep at night, but I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if you know what I mean.
I would. And specialmarkproductions.com for all your Movie Man needs. This coming weekend, I will be at the Dual Fest going on in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. The Midwest Weird Fest and a Night of Horror film festivals are going on at the exact same time. They're going to have a couple of world premieres, a couple of Midwest premieres of indie films, a very interesting variety of films, and I'm going to be there to try to cover as much as possible, as well as possibly get some interviews from filmmakers there. Dean Bertram, who we've had on the show, runs it. It's a great fest. My first time was last year, and I'm going back. There's some pretty wild choices that they made for films. They're also doing a special showing of Eraserhead Friday evening on the big screen. In the theater. So they're doing that. That's exciting. I'm looking forward to that. So look for coverage for that in the next 2 weeks when I finally get around to dropping reviews and such. And speaking of Wednesday night, Ian, yours is at 8:00, you said?
Yeah.
Oh, well, see, I will probably be done beating myself up over my Oscar choices because it's my Consequence show starting at 7:30 p.m. Wednesday night right here on the YouTube channel live. I will be doing it as I tell you how many I got wrong and then pick from the Wheel of Random, which is a group of suggestions of bad rom-coms, Hallmark movies, or just bad movies in general. I will randomly pick 3 of them for, I gave it away. I got 3 wrong. So find out which 3 are my Consequence films, which ones I got right and wrong, and tune in live here, 7:30 p.m. And that's what I got. We're trying to get to 4,000 subscribers before the end of the year. It was a slow couple of months, but like, subscribe, bells and whistles and all that here. And check out the links for everybody who was on my panel tonight. Links will be in the body of the description of this podcast. I thank you so much. And until next time, remember, have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.